Have you ever watched a woman stand up in a boardroom full of powerful men, risking her career, her reputation, everything just to speak the truth no one else dared to say? What if that truth shattered her life, and then rebuilt it into something even stronger? Because this isn't just a story about betrayal and corporate games. This is about the moment she looked her enemy in the eye and refused to be silent. And trust me, you'll want to see how it ends. If you believe courage matters more than power, hit subscribe right now and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story that could change the way you see the world. Drop a comment below. Would you have had the guts to stand up like Emily? And if this inspired you, share it with a friend who needs a reminder that the truth always finds a way. Emily. Carter pressed her palm flat against the icy glass door, staring up at the steel and glass monolith towering 50 stories into the Manhattan sky. For a moment, she thought about turning around. No one here knew her name, and most of them never would. She was just another intern in a borrowed suit that pinched her shoulders and did nothing to hide how out of place she looked. But she couldn't let herself hesitate. Not now. She sucked in a breath, shoved open the door, and stepped inside the lobby. The marble floors gleamed like polished mirrors, reflecting 100 pairs of expensive Italian shoes she could never afford. Executives in custom-tailored suits brushed past her, murmuring about merger projections, IPOs, and quarterly earnings that sounded like foreign languages. The security desk loomed ahead. Emily clutched her thin folder, the edges already dog-eared from how tightly she'd been holding it on the subway. If she could just get to her assigned floor without tripping over her own nerves, it would be a victory. Then she heard the voice behind her, a voice she would come to despise. Well, look at this. Who let the charity case intern through the front door? She turned. Kyle Henderson, junior associate, slick hair, smug smile. He flicked his badge against the scanner, not bothering to wait for a response. You look lost, he added, his grin widening. Try not to embarrass yourself today. Or the rest of us. The elevator dinged open. Emily kept her eyes on the brushed steel doors, refusing to give Kyle the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. But inside, her stomach was a knot of dread. She had known people like him all her life, the ones who measured worth by pedigree and bank balance. The elevator was crowded, packed with employees comparing notes on the massive acquisition everyone was buzzing about. She caught snippets of their conversation as she pressed herself into the back corner, clutching her folder to her chest. If Blake and Quinn lock down the source code, it'll be a monopoly overnight. $1.8 billion in valuation, and the patents alone are worth half that. Vanessa's team is already celebrating. Ethan Blake doesn't lose deals. Emily swallowed hard. Ethan Blake, CEO, legend predator, in a suit. The man whose signature could make or break fortunes. And here she was, a nobody in scuffed flats, praying her resume wasn't already in a shredder somewhere. She stared at her reflection in the polished elevator wall. Her brown hair was pulled back too tightly, her eyes tired from too many nights studying contracts until dawn. She didn't look like she belonged, but she hadn't come here to blend in. When the elevator stopped on the 32nd floor, half the group stepped out. She stayed put. Her assigned desk was on 38. Another ding. A hush settled over the remaining passengers as a tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped in. Ethan Blake. He didn't look at her or at anyone. He just keyed in his floor 50 and folded his arms, radiating an icy authority that made the air feel thinner. Kyle spoke up again, softer this time, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Better hope you're not working under Vanessa. She eats interns for breakfast. Emily's face warmed. She lifted her chin. She would not let them see her cower. When the elevator finally stopped on 38, she stepped off, her legs wobbly. As the doors closed behind her, she caught the briefest glimpse of Ethan Blake's eyes flicking her way just for an instant. Cool and unreadable. Then the steel doors sealed shut, cutting her off from whatever judgment he might have been forming. The hallway was lined with glass offices and buzzing workstations. She forced herself forward, telling herself the same sentence she'd whispered in the mirror that morning. Just do your job, learn everything, survive. A young woman with a Bluetooth headset waved her over to a tiny cubicle shoved beside a humming copier. "This is you," she said briskly. "Don't touch anything you're not assigned, and stay out of Vanessa's way." Emily nodded. Her heart was still racing. She set her folder down, smoothed the front of her ill-fitting blazer, and inhaled slowly. This was her shot. She'd fought for the scholarship, the interviews, the right to stand here, even if it meant she'd be a target from day one. A notification pinged on her monitor. 9:00 a.m. Strategy meeting, mandatory attendance. $1.8 billion on the line, and she would be in the room, watching, learning. Maybe, just maybe, proving she wasn't as replaceable as Kyle and everyone else thought. Emily closed her eyes for a second, gathering every shred of courage she had left. You've come too far to be intimidated now. And with that, she picked up her notes and walked toward the glass conference room, ready or not. Emily's shoes squeaked against the tile as she slipped back into her cubicle long after most of the office had emptied out. The overhead lights had already switched to their dim, nighttime mode, casting everything in a bluish haze that made the rows of glass partitions feel more like a labyrinth than a workspace. But she couldn't leave. Not yet. She dropped her folder on the desk and powered up the company laptop, her pulse tapping out a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knew she should go home. Her mom was probably wondering why she hadn't called, but her gut wouldn't let her walk away. Emily pulled up the merger files. Hundreds of pages loaded onto the screen, each contract line packed with clauses, conditions, footnotes. Her eyes were gritty with exhaustion, but she forced herself to read every word. If she missed something, it could destroy everything Blake and Quinn was trying to secure. For nearly an hour, she combed through indemnity sections and intellectual property schedules, line by line. She scrolled past the standard provisions, the safe boilerplate language she'd memorized in law school. Nothing unusual, until she saw it. Clause 21.7d. Her cursor hovered over the text, and a cold unease prickled the back of her neck. She clicked to expand the paragraph. In the event the acquired party demonstrates compliance with agreed technical milestones as defined in Appendix G, the exclusivity period for the licensed source code shall be automatically extended for an indefinite duration. She blinked, reading it again. And again. Indefinite duration. The words felt like a hook in her chest. She flipped to Appendix G. No definitions, no clear list of requirements, just a vague reference to future assessments. Emily's throat went dry. If this clause stayed in the contract, the target company could lock down the proprietary software forever effectively, holding Blake and Quinn hostage long after the merger closed. This wasn't a harmless oversight. This was a loaded weapon, hidden where no one was supposed to notice. Her heart thumped so loudly, she thought it might echo through the cubicle walls. She leaned back in the chair, pressing her palms against her face. It's not your responsibility, she told herself. You're a temporary intern. You're not paid to challenge partners. But the voice in her head wouldn't stop. If you stay quiet, and this goes through, you'll know you let it happen. She closed her eyes, picturing Ethan Blake's face, cool, dismissive, unreadable. He wouldn't thank her for questioning the deal. Neither would Vanessa Quinn. The legal team had probably spent months refining every section. If she raised her hand in that conference room tomorrow and pointed this out, she'd be telling them all, you missed something. I didn't. The arrogance, the audacity. But wasn't that why she was here? To be more than the girl with second-hand shoes and a scholarship resume? Emily's gaze fell to the clock on her monitor, 11:17 p.m. She thought about her mom, probably dozing off in the apartment they could barely afford. She thought about Kyle's smirk. Vanessa's cold stare, the quiet humiliation she carried every time she set foot in this place. Her chest tightened. No matter how much she wanted to disappear into the background, she couldn't. Not when she saw the trap laid out in black and white. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a moment, she considered flagging the clause in a polite, unassuming note, something she could email anonymously. But she knew it wouldn't matter. If she didn't have the nerve to stand behind her own conviction, no one else would take her seriously. She leaned forward, highlighting clause 21.7d in red. Her hands were shaking, but she couldn't stop now. She pulled up the project notes, cross-referenced the definitions, and typed her first observations into a clean document. Potential indefinite exclusivity. Risk recommend immediate legal review. When she finished, she sat frozen, her cursor blinking back at her like a dare. This was it. She could close the laptop, pretend she never saw any of it, and blend back into the sea of disposable interns. Or she could walk into that strategy meeting tomorrow morning and risk every shred of credibility she had left. A quiet voice in her memory rose, her mother's, scratchy from years of pain, but unshakable in conviction. The truth is still the truth, even if you're the only one saying it. Emily swallowed hard. She closed the document, saved it to the secure drive, and packed her things. As she walked out under the hum of the exit lights, her fear felt heavier than her briefcase. But underneath the fear, something else flickered. Resolve. Tomorrow she would speak up, even if it cost her everything. Morning came too fast. Emily barely slept, her mind replaying the same question over and over. What if you're wrong? By 8:55 a.m., she was standing outside the executive boardroom on the 50th floor, clutching her notes so hard the paper was crumpling in her fists. Through the glass walls, she could already see them, rows of directors in immaculate suits. Vanessa Quinn seated near the head of the polished oak table, her posture a perfect blend of poise and silent threat. And Ethan Blake, he was at the end of the table, reviewing a printed agenda with an expression so unreadable it made her chest feel hollow. When he looked up, their eyes met just for a heartbeat, and she thought she saw something flicker there. Annoyance, curiosity. It didn't matter. She was about to destroy whatever tiny scrap of goodwill she might have earned. The door swung open. A young assistant gestured briskly. "You're late. Take a seat." Emily walked in, every step heavy. She could feel the weight of every stare, calculating, dismissive. She slid into the lone empty chair along the side wall, close enough to hear, but far enough to remind her she didn't belong here. Vanessa's voice cut through the low murmur of conversation. "As we finalize this acquisition, I want to thank the legal team for their extraordinary diligence." She didn't look at Emily once. Clause 21.7d, as reviewed by Senior Counsel, presents no issues. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. The words felt like a door slamming shut in her face. She could stay silent, just like they expected. She could walk out later with no one remembering her name, no one caring that she'd been there at all. Or she could stand up. Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. His voice was low, measured. "Any further comments before we move this to a vote?" Silence. Every instinct screamed for her to stay quiet, but her mother's voice rose in her mind again. The truth is still the truth. She forced herself to her feet. Her chair scraped the floor, the sound slicing through the hush like a blade. "Excuse me." Her voice was smaller than she wanted it to be. She cleared her throat, trying to keep her hands from shaking. "This clause 21.7d, it's not safe." Every head turned in unison. Ethan's gaze locked on her, steady and expressionless. Vanessa didn't even pretend to be polite. She lifted one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I'm sorry. Who are you again?" Emily swallowed hard. "Emily Carter, legal intern." Vanessa's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "An intern." She said it like a punchline. A few of the directors exchanged amused looks. Emily gripped her folder tighter. "I've reviewed the contract multiple times. The language around the exclusivity of the source code is deliberately vague. If this merger goes through as written, the acquired company could retain indefinite control over the technology. We'd be locked out, forever." Someone coughed. A pen tapped against the table. Vanessa's expression turned glacial. "That clause has been vetted by 3 senior partners." "Are you suggesting you know more than all of them combined?" Emily's chest burned. She forced herself to meet Vanessa's stare. "I'm suggesting that this clause is a trap, and someone needs to say it before you sign away everything." A stunned silence fell across the room. Ethan didn't look away. He was studying her as if she were some anomaly he couldn't quite classify. His jaw shifted, but he didn't speak. Vanessa glanced at him, then back at Emily. "Miss Carter, your inexperience is showing." Emily felt her face heat, but she didn't sit down. "I may be inexperienced," she said, voice trembling, "but that doesn't make me wrong." The moment stretched so long, she thought her knees might buckle. Vanessa finally turned to Ethan, her tone controlled but dripping with disdain. Ethan, if you'd prefer, we halt the vote to entertain the theories of a 24-year-old intern, by all means. But some of us have actual work to do. Ethan didn't answer her. His eyes hadn't left Emily. Her breath caught. She knew she'd gone too far. She'd crossed the invisible line that kept people like her in the shadows. But there was no way to take it back. If she was going to burn, she'd rather burn for telling the truth. Ethan slowly leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished wood. "Miss Carter," he said, voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it. "Are you prepared to stand by that claim?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Vanessa exhaled, her tone ice cold. "You've made your point. Now sit down." Emily stayed standing. Her pulse roared in her ears. Ethan's eyes didn't waver. And in that impossible silence, she knew something had shifted. Something she couldn't name yet, but would change everything. The silence in the boardroom didn't last. Vanessa was the first to break it, her voice slicing the tension like a scalpel. A legal intern, she set her tone so controlled it felt rehearsed. Standing here lecturing a room full of professionals with decades of experience. She leaned back, folding her arms, as if she were observing something pathetic. "Tell me, Miss Carter, how long did it take you to invent this theory?" Emily felt her face flush hot. Her heart was still racing, her hands locked around the edge of her folder to keep them from shaking. "I didn't invent anything," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "The clause is there. You can read it yourself." Vanessa's smile was thin and humorless. "We did read it. That's why it stayed in the contract. But thank you for your input." She glanced at Ethan as if daring him to contradict her. "Perhaps next time we can ask the interns to draft our agreements too, since clearly our legal team isn't up to your standards." A few of the directors shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Emily swallowed against the tightness in her throat. She looked to Ethan, desperate for any sign he believed her, or at least understood why she'd said something. But he didn't meet her gaze. He was staring past her, his expression so blank it felt like a slap. Her voice dropped, small and tired. "I was just trying to help." Vanessa's eyes flashed. "Then help by sitting down. And next time you feel the urge to show off, maybe remember your place." Emily sank back into her chair because she couldn't think of anything else to do. The heat of humiliation burned up her neck, and she clenched her teeth to keep it from showing on her face. The rest of the meeting blurred past in a series of hollow presentations. Every time she looked up, Vanessa's eyes found her again, sharp with quiet triumph. Ethan never once looked in her direction. When the boardroom finally emptied out, Emily was the last to leave. Her legs felt wooden, her skin prickling with the knowledge that she'd just made herself unforgettable in the worst possible way. She rode the elevator alone, watching the floor numbers blink down toward the lobby. All she could hear was Vanessa's voice echoing in her skull. "Remember your place." Back at her cubicle, she collapsed into her chair, her breath ragged. She'd been stupid to think the truth would matter more than politics. She'd walked right into the fire, and nobody had lifted a finger to pull her out. Her computer chimed, breaking her spiral of regret. A new email notification glowed in her inbox. Subject reassignment notice. Her stomach lurched. With trembling fingers, she clicked it open. Effective immediately, you are relieved of all duties related to the merger project. Please report to Records Management for reassignment. Records Management, the lowest tier of legal grunt work, scanning, filing endless hours of busy work designed to make people quit. She stared at the screen, her pulse roaring in her ears. Kyle's voice materialized behind her syrupy with false sympathy. "Well," he said, leaning against the partition. "That was impressive. You managed to insult Vanessa Quinn in front of the entire board. Seriously, do you have a death wish?" Emily didn't answer. He clicked his tongue. "You know, I almost feel bad. You could have kept your head down and coasted to a reference letter. But no, had to be the hero." He pushed off the wall, smirking. "Enjoy Records. You'll last a week." She waited until he walked away before she let herself exhale. Her chest felt tight, like her ribs were caving in. She wanted to crawl under the desk and disappear, but she wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, she closed her laptop, stacked her notes with deliberate care, and stood up. Every movement felt like it weighed twice as much. As she stepped into the hallway, she could still feel the sting of Ethan's silence, how he'd looked right past her, like she was nothing. That hurt more than anything Vanessa had said. She reached the elevator and pressed the button with her knuckle. The doors slid open, and for one irrational moment she half expected Ethan to be standing there, ready to say he was sorry that she'd been right all along. But the elevator was empty. Of course it was. Emily stepped inside, lifted her chin, and made herself breathe. If this was the cost of telling the truth, she'd pay it, even if it broke her piece by piece. The doors closed, sealing her off from the floor. She'd never be allowed on again. And for the first time since she'd walked into this building, she wondered if she'd made a mistake she couldn't undo. A week later, Emily thought she'd learned to survive the humiliation. She spent her days buried in records, management scanning contracts. No one would ever read, telling herself it was temporary. If she kept her head down, maybe she could salvage a shred of credibility. Maybe she could still finish her internship with some dignity. But on Monday morning, everything she'd clung to unraveled in less than 5 minutes. Her badge didn't unlock the door to records. She tried again, hands sweating. Nothing. She turned, heart stuttering, and saw 2 men in dark suits, waiting by the elevators. One held an envelope. Emily Carter. She nodded, throat too tight to answer. "You're needed on the 50th floor. Now." The ride-up was silent. The doors opened onto the same boardroom hallway where she'd stood a week earlier, trying to find her courage. This time, there was no adrenaline, just a sinking certainty in her gut that she was about to lose everything. The boardroom was already full. Ethan stood at the head of the table, a thick folder in front of him. Vanessa sat to his left, her expression carved from stone. Emily stepped inside, pulse hammering in her ears. Ethan didn't look up. His voice was flat as he spoke. "Ms. Carter, you're aware of the confidential nature of our merger with Novatech." "Yes," she whispered. Vanessa flipped open the folder, revealing printed screenshots. "Then perhaps you can explain this." She pushed the papers across the table. Emily forced herself to look. An email thread she'd never seen sent from her company address, attaching internal contracts marked confidential. The timestamp was 2 nights ago. Her vision wavered. "This isn't real," she said hoarsely. Vanessa's voice was silk over steel. "It confirmed the emails originated from your login. From your workstation." Emily felt the floor tilt. "I didn't send this," she said louder. "I wasn't even in the building. Check the security logs." Ethan finally looked up. His eyes were cold, in a way she'd never seen. "We will review every record. In the meantime, you are suspended pending investigation." His words landed like a blow. Emily's voice cracked. "Ethan, sir, please. I didn't do this." He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just watched her with that same terrible, impassive stare. "Remove your badge. Leave the building." She shook her head, panic roaring up her throat. "You know me. You know I wouldn't." Vanessa cut her off. "Security will escort you out." The door opened behind her. Heavy footsteps. Emily's heart twisted. She turned to Ethan one last time, searching his face for anything doubt, regret, even anger she could fight. But there was nothing. He looked right through her, as if she'd never existed. Her hands trembled as she unhooked her badge from her collar. She set it on the table, her fingertips lingering on the plastic, as if it could somehow anchor her to the life she'd built here. No one spoke. No one defended her. When she finally looked up, Vanessa's mouth curved into the faintest smile, and Emily understood this was the punishment. Not just losing her position, not just the accusation. It was being erased. Security stepped closer. Emily's voice came out broken. "I didn't do this," she whispered again. "I swear to God." No one replied. She walked out, with her shoulders squared, because it was the only defiance she had left. As the boardroom door closed behind her, a cold, hollow numbness settled in her chest. Down the hallway, Kyle was leaning against a column phone in hand. When he saw her, his eyebrows lifted in mock surprise. "Wow," he said lightly. "Didn't think you'd actually get yourself fired." Emily didn't slow. She didn't look back. She pushed through the lobby doors, into the raw February air, the wind cutting straight through her thin coat. Only then, when no one could see, did she let her tears fall. The boardroom felt colder after she was gone. Ethan didn't say a word as the others filed out murmuring about damage control and PR statements. He stayed at the head of the table, staring at the folder of printed emails that had ruined her. For reasons he couldn't admit even to himself, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt sick. When the last person left, he shoved the folder aside and pulled up the digital version of the merger contract. His fingers moved fast over the trackpad, page after page, clause after clause. He didn't stop until he found the section she had tried to warn them about. Clause 21.7d. He read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. Indefinite exclusivity. No defined milestones. No end date. His pulse climbed higher with every line. She was right. Ethan leaned back, pressing a hand to his temple. He replayed that morning in his head, her voice breaking, as she insisted she hadn't sent the emails the way she looked at him, like he was the last person in the world who might believe her. And he hadn't. The phone on the table buzzed. He snatched it up. Mr. Blake, the head of IT, said, voice low. We completed the forensic review of the email logs. Tell me, Ethan ordered. There's no evidence Emily Carter accessed the files in question. In fact, the man hesitated. All login activity originated from the machine assigned to Vanessa Quinn. The words landed like a sledgehammer. He gripped the phone tighter. You're telling me Vanessa framed her? It appears so, sir. Ethan's jaw clenched. Rage rolled up his spine, cold and unstoppable. He thought of the way Vanessa had smiled when Emily broke down, the satisfaction in her voice when she'd ordered security to escort her out. He'd been so sure he was protecting the company. Instead, he'd let a viper hollow it out from the inside and sacrifice the only person who'd tried to stop it. He slammed his hand onto the table. The impact rattled the water glasses and made the room echo. She saved us, he whispered, his voice raw. And I threw her to the wolves. Ethan didn't wait for another report. He hung up and strode out of the boardroom, ignoring every startled glance that followed him down the hall. Vanessa was in her office, pretending to review a stack of contracts. She looked up when he pushed the door open, her expression practiced and calm. Ethan. Don't, he snapped. His voice dropped to a lethal quiet. Don't pretend. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? He stepped closer, so close she had to tilt her chin up to hold his gaze. You sabotaged an intern to cover your incompetence. You forged evidence to make sure she couldn't prove you wrong. And you nearly cost this company everything. Her mask cracked. You have no proof of that. Oh, I do, he said. His hands shook as he pulled out the IT report and dropped it on her desk. I have all the proof I need. She stared at the papers, her face draining of color. You're finished here, Ethan said quietly. Security is on the way. Don't bother trying to spin this. You won't get another chance. Vanessa's lip curled, but she didn't argue. She looked away, and in that moment, he knew she understood exactly how badly she'd lost. He didn't wait for security to arrive. He turned on his heel and left her office behind. As he strode back to his own floor, the guilt pressed down so hard he could barely breathe. Every memory of Emily, her clear eyes, her steady voice, the way she'd stood alone in front of everyone, cut deeper than any betrayal he'd ever known. He told himself he couldn't afford mistakes, but he'd made the worst one of his life. Ethan stopped at his office door. He didn't bother sitting. Get me your contact information. He ordered his assistant, who looked startled. Who, sir? Emily Carter. His voice cracked. I don't care how long it takes. Find her. He turned to the window, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. Some mistakes could never be erased, but he would spend every day trying to make this one right. 2 days later, Ethan stood in front of a brick building so modest it looked out of place against the skyline. The sign above the peeling door read, East River Community Legal Center. He'd spent 48 hours tracking her down. Every number he called had gone to voicemail. Every email bounced. Finally, a volunteer at her old law school mentioned she'd been seen here helping teach workshops to kids whose parents couldn't afford attorneys. He climbed the steps, every movement weighted by a regret he couldn't shake off. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Folding tables were scattered with worksheets. A dozen kids hunched over them, pencils scratching. At the front of the room stood Emily. She looked different. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, her clothes simple and comfortable. But the determination in her face hadn't changed. He watched her lean down to help a little boy solve a question, her voice soft enough he couldn't hear. She smiled when the child got it right. It was the kind of smile she'd never shown in the boardroom, the kind that made his throat tighten. For one brief second, he almost turned around and left. He knew she deserved that much peace, but he couldn't walk away without trying. Emily finally straightened and glanced toward the door. Their eyes met. The warmth in her face vanished. Her shoulders stiffened, her jaw set. "Kids," she said quietly, "work on the next page. I'll be right back." She crossed the room in measured steps, stopping just inside the doorway. She didn't invite him in. Her voice was flat. "What are you doing here?" Ethan swallowed. His chest felt tight. "I needed to see you. You don't get to need anything from me." Her words landed like a slap, sharper, because they were so calm. He nodded once. "I know." They stood in the doorway, the sounds of children's voices in the background. He searched her eyes for any trace of the trust she'd once given him. All he saw was disappointment. "I came to say I failed you," he said, finally, his voice low. "You tried to protect us, and I didn't listen. I let them humiliate you. And when you were accused of something you didn't do, I didn't even give you a chance to explain." Emily's chin lifted, but her eyes shimmered. "No, you didn't." "I was wrong," he said. The words felt heavier than any boardroom confession. "I was so damn convinced I had to protect the company that I forgot the company is made of people. And you were the only one brave enough to tell the truth." She looked away, blinking fast. He stepped closer. "I fired Vanessa. I canceled the merger. I told the board everything. But none of that matters if you don't hear it from me." Emily's voice cracked. "You think this fixes it?" "No," he whispered. "Nothing can." She swallowed hard. For a moment, her expression softened, and he almost let himself hope. But then she shook her head. "You stood there and watched them drag me out, like I was nothing." "I know," he said again, voice hoarse, "and it's the biggest mistake I've ever made." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything that had broken. "I came here to ask you to come back," Ethan said finally. "Not because I want to erase what happened, because I want to prove it won't ever happen again." Emily drew in a shaky breath. Her eyes met his, and for the first time since he walked in, he saw the pain behind her anger. "I don't trust you," she whispered. His throat tightened. "I don't expect you to. I don't know if I ever will." He nodded. "Then I'll wait, however long it takes." Her eyes glistened, but she turned away before a tear could fall. "Go home, Ethan," she said softly. "You've said what you needed to say." She walked back to the tables without looking over her shoulder. Ethan stood there, feeling like the world had tilted under his feet. As she knelt beside a little girl to help her with a worksheet, he realized it was the first time in years he'd had no idea how to fix something. He left the building slowly, each step heavier than the last. Outside, the winter air was sharp against his face. He didn't wipe it away when the first tear slipped free. A week passed before she heard from him again. Emily returned from the community center late one evening to find an envelope slipped under her apartment door. No logo, no signature, just her name written in a steady hand she recognized instantly. She set her keys down, her fingers trembling as she tore the flap open. Inside was a contract, thick cream paper official letterhead, and a folded note in Ethan's handwriting. Senior Legal Counsel. She read the title 3 times before she could make herself look at the rest. The compensation was more than fair, but that wasn't what made her chest constrict. It was Section 4, highlighted in yellow. Any employee accused of misconduct shall be granted a fair hearing and the right to present evidence prior to any disciplinary action. At the bottom of the page, he'd scrawled a single line, "No traps, no conditions, just respect." Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the ache that rose in her throat. She'd never asked him for an apology like this. She never thought she'd get one. For 2 days, she didn't reply. Not because she wanted to punish him, but because she needed to be sure she wasn't saying yes, just to quiet the part of her that still wanted to believe in him. On the 3rd day, she called the number printed at the bottom. The receptionist sounded startled when she gave her name. "Mr. Blake has asked to be notified immediately," she said. "Will you hold?" Emily hesitated, then nodded, even though no one could see her. When his voice came on the line, it was quiet, careful. "Emily." She closed her eyes. "I read it, and—" Her throat felt tight. "I'll come back." There was a pause. Then, softer than she'd ever heard him, he said, "Thank you." 1 week later, she walked through the lobby of Blake and Quinn Capital, her head held high. People stopped to stare as she passed, but she didn't lower her gaze. She wasn't here to hide. When she stepped into the elevator, she caught her reflection in the polished steel. No part of her looked like the intern they'd tried to break. On the 50th floor, the conference room was filled with reporters, cameras pointed at the small podium near the windows. Ethan stood behind it, hands braced on the sides, waiting. The room quieted as she walked in. He met her eyes and didn't look away. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan began, his voice steady but rough around the edges. "You all know about the events that jeopardized this company's integrity. But what you don't know is who saved us." He paused, his gaze fixed on her like she was the only person in the room. Emily Carter identified the risk that nearly destroyed this merger. She spoke up when no one else would. And when she was falsely accused, we failed her. I failed her. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. He didn't flinch. "She is the reason we're standing here today. The reason Blake and Quinn will not compromise its principles again." The applause started in hesitant claps before growing to something steady, undeniable. Emily felt her heart kick hard against her ribs. Ethan stepped aside, gesturing her forward. For a moment, she just stood there. Then, she walked up to the podium, her hands light on the edge, as she met his gaze. "Thank you," she said, her voice low but clear. He shook his head once. "No, thank you." She swallowed her chest tight, with something that felt almost like relief. "Almost. Ethan," she whispered so only he could hear this time, "don't forget to trust me." His smile was small, but real. "I won't." And in that quiet promise, she finally believed it. The conference room emptied out slowly, but neither of them moved. Emily stood at the edge of the podium, her hands resting against the polished wood, as if she needed to anchor herself to something real. Ethan watched her in the quiet that followed, the weight of everything unsaid thick between them. He took a step closer, then another, until there was no more distance left to pretend he didn't care. "I meant what I said," he told, her voice low, every word. She looked up, her eyes searching his. "I know." "And there's something else," he added, his heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with business. She waited, her breath caught in her chest. He took a slow breath. "I spent years thinking control was the only way to protect what mattered. But you—" He shook his head, his voice unsteady. "You taught me that trust is stronger than control. That truth matters more than pride, and that some people are worth risking everything for." Her throat tightened, and she couldn't look away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it so she could see the simple diamond ring inside. "Emily," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't want another day where I don't believe in you, where I don't stand beside you. I love you. I've loved you since the moment you stood up in that boardroom and told me the truth no one else dared to say." Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't try to stop them. He drew in a shaky breath. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, she was 24 again, terrified and small and alone. But the woman she'd become was something stronger, someone who refused to be silent, who refused to be erased. "Yes," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Yes." The word broke something open in both of them. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when she leaned up to kiss him, it felt like every wound between them finally began to heal. Weeks later, under a sky as clear as a promise, Emily walked down a flower-lined aisle in a dress she'd never imagined herself wearing. She saw her mother's proud tears in the front row. She saw the faces of people who'd once doubted her now standing to witness her victory, not just over injustice, but over the fear that she'd never belong anywhere. Ethan waited at the end of the aisle, his eyes steady, no trace of the coldness she'd once hated. Only hope, only love. When she reached him, he took her hand, and she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. As they spoke, their vows, Neither of them looked away. No traps, no conditions, just respect, and a love that had survived every test. And when they kissed, the applause rose around them like the start of a new life. In a world where success often demands silence and compromise, Emily's story reminds us that integrity is never negotiable. When she stood up in that boardroom, she knew she was risking everything: her job, her future, and her reputation. But she also knew that staying quiet would cost her something far greater: her self-respect. This is a lesson we can all carry into our own lives. Whether you're in a corporate office, a classroom, or your own family, there will be moments when you see something that isn't right. You'll feel the pressure to look the other way to keep your head down. But the truth doesn't disappear just because it makes people uncomfortable. Emily's courage shows us that speaking up isn't about arrogance. It's about honoring your values, even when it's hard. And in the end, that courage can inspire change far beyond what you can imagine. If her story moved you, leave a comment below sharing a time you had to stand up for what was right, even when no one believed you. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that prove integrity always wins.